presently the professor at the Department of History, University of Hyderabad. She was formerly professor at the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Kolkata. Her present areas of research are politico-cultural history of Northwest India, early Indian linkages with early Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean Buddhist and trade networks, and history of everyday life. She is a recipient of Charles Wallace Visiting Fellowship, Nehru Trust UK Travel Award, Anita Scholarship, and a lot more, many more of the scholarships. She was awarded the Savitri Chandra Shobha Memorial Prize of Indian History Congress for the book From the Oxus to the Indus, a political and cultural study in 2017. She acted as a sectional president, Ancient India section for the 80th session of Indian History Congress and Regional History Congress in West Bengal and Punjab. And she also has many other accolades, but I stop here and then I specially welcome her for this panel. Very special welcome to you, Suchandra.
I congratulate Professor D.S. Achyuta Rao for endowment and Manipal Academy for Higher Education for striving for academic excellence, and in that endeavor promoting knowledge and making us aware of our heritage through publication of such kind of books that we are discussing today. Thank you very much for inviting me. It is indeed a privilege, and I pay my homage to the memory of Professor S. Setter, whom I first met in 1999 in Leiden, and our association continued. Professor Shiva Prakash has just mentioned about A.K. Ramanujan. So we all know that we were introduced to the prospect of a variety of Rama tales told by others with radical differences among them by the seminal work of A.K. Ramanujan. And it is heartening to see this book actually brings that concept to the fore. The book, Multivalence of the Epic, retelling the Ramayana in South India and Southeast Asia, has been excellently introduced by the editor, Professor Parul Pandyadhar, whose passion and hard work loom large in the editing and production of the book. Manipal University Press, I must say this, has gone beyond their own set standard of publication. In this case, I congratulate them, and they are much, much better than many leading international publishers. The photography, the colored pictures. Nowadays, publishers don't want to print in colors. The art historians know that very well. And so it's a sheer delight to see the book, to hold the book in hand and have the impressions that wonderfully came through the pictures. Professor Shiva Prakash has actually enlightened us by his oration now. And when I was reading the book, I found that each of the contributors, we all know, are specialists in the field, and they have all contributed to the making of this amazing book, which is a serious addition to knowledge, not only in the epic studies, but also in the domain of India and Southeast Asian studies. We heard Ambassador Nirupama Rao talking about Caribbean also, the scenario, and I found that it is wonderful. We have this one spectrum, at one spectrum, Southeast Asia. In the other spectrum, we have Caribbean. So this has come out so well in her lecture too. Now, when we talk of Southeast Asia, in the context of any region, two names actually resonate in our mind. One is Suvarna Bhumi, which is identified with mainland Southeast Asia. The other is Suvarnadeepa, which is the maritime Southeast Asia. This book traverses both the land and the water. Here we have a series of interesting essays which speak about the retelling of the variety of the narration of the Rama Katha, engagement with a particular episode of the Rama story, which in a spatio-temporal context, and also in the context of the mediums. So many different mediums have been used for retelling the stories. Moreover, the book demonstrates the degree of Rama stories' influence on various local cultures. Thus, multiple layers, multiple versions, multiple topoi of the Ramayana unfold in front of us through this book. This was possible only through interactions between regions of India and regions of Southeast Asia. In case of this book, the chosen area is South India. I must say that I always think that we should never use this blanket term India, Southeast Asia. it was the different regions which actually interacted with different regions of Southeast Asia in various time frame. So it's very good that it has come that South India and Southeast Asia. Now these interactions could be through multiple routes. And when we look at these interactions, we find that the beginning of the uninterrupted maritime exchanges and the land exchanges true in the East Coast, coastal and high sea voyages alike, goes for gaining a momentum since the 1st century CE. And it has been viewed by scholars, like when we look at this interaction, through the lens of Indianization or localization, and also through convergence, which is articulated by Professor Harman Kulke. Harman Kulke's thesis of looking at convergence on both sides of the Bay of Bengal seems to be more acceptable, as he emphasizes that it was not social distance, but social nearness that was the crucial factor in selecting and adopting certain Indian cultural elements in Southeast Asia. So thus, we see that nearness between the societies of the coastal regions of Bay of Bengal made the Indian model so attractive to societies there. And this assimilation, adaptation, borrowing, all, and using the indigenous elements came through in such a beautiful way that we have so many Ramayanas in different parts of Southeast Asia. And so therefore, this nearness was obviously made possible by all kinds of connectivity between the regions. I'm so glad that Parul has taken Kulke's thesis forward in the introduction of the book and talks about investigating epic encounters within South India and between the two zones through the prism of cultural convergence, which has received little attention so far. She talks about the way boundaries of medium and genre have been crossed in artistic expressions of the Ramayana tradition and how such crossings have shaped the creation of new Ramayanas. These crossings, also in the literal sense of the term, were indeed facilitated by the maritime and the coastal routes and the voyages of people, monks, merchants, traders, artisans. These are all agencies through which the stories were told, retold, and story ideas were actually moving around between the regions of South Asia and Southeast Asia. There were many traveling narratives like the stories from the Jatakas, Avadanas, and the epics, which touched the heart and the imagination of the people of Southeast Asia. There has been retelling of the narratives, and here the epic Ramayana stands out. Ramayana has been retold, rewritten, reenacted, and refashioned across South and Southeast Asian landscape. And significantly, I learned from, I was not aware of it, I learned from the book that in inscription in Southeast Asia, the story goes back to 6th century CE. So prior to the art historical evidence which Parul was mentioning in the introduction. So now, therefore, it was and it remains an integral part of the cultural consciousness and political imagination of the Asian people. In the regional Ramayana tellings, epigraphs assume a pride of place. We learn that in Karnataka, the earliest allusions to Rama and Ramayana comes from epigraphs, which played a role in the political imagination of the ruling dynasties. Again, in the context of the bronze sculptures, we learn that image of Rama, Sita, Lakshman, and Hanuman become important icons for processional worship, which was actually presented in our essay by Sharda Srinivasan, who is present here. Ramayana recitation gained popularity and became imbibed as an art form into the indigenous oral traditions, a unique form of story and performance manifested through visual forms. These dramatic performances involved tangible and intangible art forms, including oral traditions, folk songs, dances, pantomime, and artistic manifestations, which are embedded with symbolic connotations denoting self-experiences, collective memories, and ritualistic significance. There was a folk counterpart to Valmiki's version of the epic, which is an intangible heritage. So what we find is that often this kind of intangible heritage becomes tangible when a form is given to a narrative. So therefore, when we see the Ramayana narrative in the sculptures of Cambodia or so other places, so here is a moment where the intangible, the story, the folk stories gets transferred, gets translated into a tangible heritage. Often this intangible becomes tangible when I've already spoken that, so I may leave. But what is interesting also, when I was reading the articles, I found that just as the crafting of storytelling by the Buddhists in the Jatakas brought about a specific form of oral communication, the Ramakatha also became a favored means of articulating epic narratives. A few of the chosen episodes were given a form and a shape which added to the grandeur as the story came alive in visual representations. Thus, there was an interlacing of the intangible with the tangible. Why certain episodes were chosen over others is difficult to decide, but the authors tried to delve deeper into this for a possible reason. A case in point is the comparative prominence given to Hanuman in different kinds of time, periods of time, and also the preference of representing the Yuddha Kanda. So it is often said that a researcher is like a detective. And indeed, the narrative of The Floating Maiden by Mary Brockington read like a detective story. I was fascinated. The way the author traced the creative development of the Floating Maiden episode in the Thai Ramayana to Rajashekara's Bala Ramayana is remarkable. In South India, some of the popular indigenous theatrical traditions representing the Ramayana are Yakshagana of Karnataka and Kerala and Kathakali of Kerala. So the book has essays which talk about these traditions. But interestingly, the centrality is given to Ravana in Kathakali, which offers an alternative political vision, whereas in the Yakshagana, there is an attempt to denude religiosity from the play, and which is actually a contrast from the expression of religious devotionalism offered in the Ram Leela performances in North India. And I agree with you, Professor Shiva Prakash, when you say that religiosity is not the only essence of Ramayana. We have to look beyond religious traditions and beyond religiosity. The book makes us aware that there were multi-directional traffic between South India and Southeast Asia, which acted as interconnected nodes, contributing to the genesis and circulation of the Ramayana story, leading to the several centers of Ramayana discourse. And I would like to end this first section by stating that fact that reading this book was indeed a rewarding experience. I learned a lot. I'm not a Ramayana scholar per se. My only claim to be here perhaps is that I work on the linkages. I work on connected histories. So the way the book has brought in the connected history of the regions, both within South India and beyond that, is fascinating. In this short span of time, it was not possible to discuss individual essays, and I seek indulgence from the authors. The editor, the contributor, and the publishers, and of course the Achyuta Rao Foundation, deserve a big round of applause, and we look forward to many such crossings in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suchandra.